Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, a very warm welcome to Silver Tent TV. I'm your host, Siobhan Reardon, along with my dog Elsa, who we know sometimes can join in and we just go with it. The Silver Tent is a global online platform for women over 50. It's a place to come and be nurtured as you move into the winter of your life. And it's a place to share the incredible wisdom that women, by the very fact that we've been going for a few decades, have developed. And with that in mind, I'm delighted to welcome Pauline Crawford-Omps. A very warm welcome to you, Pauline.
Thank you for welcoming me to this interview. This is wonderful. It's really good to meet you properly for the first time, I think. So this
Absolutely. And Pauline and I have a shared background, a passion about gender, around women's leadership, around men's leadership. And Pauline's one of the world's leading specialists in gender dynamics in the corporate sector, a published writer, an educator. She has a lot to contribute around that conversation. Pauline, I wanted to begin really is we're in the age of COVID. Our whole landscape has changed passionately and dramatically. We are now talking about the need for agility in organizations. We're talking about the hybrid now that needs to be created. And in all of that, where does gender dynamics sit?
Well, it's actually key to the synergy. So it's interesting about silver synergy. Synergy is all the parts coming together. And I think if we really put our hand on our heart, we have to say whether we're hybrid working from home, we're working with men and women of all sorts of different types, we still haven't got true synergy. I think we've been so focused on equality, we haven't really understood all the moving parts. So for me, gender dynamics is really all the moving parts. Where do men and women really come together? And the classic question is that not all men are the same and not all women are the same. So I've been studying that for over 30 years and we still don't have it, I was going to say right, there's no right or wrong. Well, we don't have it as fluid and as seamless as I believe we can do if we create a new narrative.
And part of that narrative, so you have your book, which is Gender Dynamics,
well, my book is an interesting. My first book is about what I call magical conversations. Now, for me, what I just said is that if men and women really had a seamless approach to life, we would always have magical conversations because magical conversations flow. Oh, excuse me. They flow and they are a space of no judgment. Now, I would challenge any woman or any man watching, do you have judgment about when a woman walks in the room or a man walks in, and it could be between women and women, but it's quite challenging not to have judgment, but that is the goal. So that seamless synergy to create magical conversations. So my first book is about magical conversations and a little bit about gender dynamics. And then I have another book coming out hopefully soon, which will be about the more in-depth side of gender dynamics. But meanwhile, I work a lot with my clients with archetypes. And, if we look at that issue is why do we not have very easy flow of conversation? What are the prejudices? What are the stereotypes that we're still holding on to?
Well, you've developed 4 archetypes, haven't you?
I have.
To help us understand that.
Well, let's put those on the table because then we can talk about, how do these characters work? So if men and women are different, let's have a look at the men first. What we do is we look at the masculine and feminine energy within all of us. So if we look at masculine and feminine energy in men, and we're not talking about sexual preferences, we've got the real tough guy, action man. He's what I call my masculine minded male. And I call him a ruler because he has a need to get things done. He likes to do it in bullet points and he's very in the box. So if you're on my agenda, I'm listening. If you're not, well, and then the other kind of man is the one who's much more in tune with females often because he's what I call a feminine-minded male. And to put it into context, I often quote Nelson Mandela as being that, all male, but had a very high intuitive energy.
I was just going to say that I'm sure EQ comes into play here.
Oh, absolutely.
About the philosopher.
But we have to remember the philosopher and the ruler are both men.
Yes.
So the underlying proposition is that they work in boxes and they're very either or, yes, no. That is the main trait. And I've interviewed many, many men, and they all say, for goodness sake, women are so complex, we don't understand them. We're very straightforward, we're simple, and they don't mean in an intellectual way. But if you look at the neurology and the biology of men, and it's not about sexual preferences, I say, it's not about generation. It is very well proven over decades that they work in that way. Whereas women, we're very circular, we're very menstrual, we're very hormonal. We have a much more tangential way of thinking about things, working on things, talking about things. And the two archetypes that I've created for women, again, display the masculine and feminine. So the masculine-minded female, I call a magician. And this feminine-minded female, I call a sovereign. So as any women are watching, you think about that, you might say, well, I'd like to be a bit of both. Well, maybe you would, because the main frame of women is that we tend to want to do everything. So we're very multitasked, multifaceted, and we do talk a lot in and you'll love this. I've interviewed so many groups of men and women, and the men will all go, well, it's either this or this, or this or this. And the women all go, oh, it's and. So it's equality and equity and diversity and inclusion. And to be honest, men find that quite difficult. So if you have a baseline sentence which says we're all equal and different, which I believe we are, we're all human beings, but we're all different, women usually find that more easy to handle than men, because they go equal, different. What does that? So the magician and the sovereign are beautiful facets of woman, of female. And I think you'll probably agree with me. If we can come together as a sisterhood, which sister synergy, we are very powerful, but we don't need to overpower men. We need to empower men.
And what would you say if people would respond to that? That's very gender stereotyping, the way you've classified. You must have had that conversation many times.
Absolutely. And what's lovely is that it's the archetypes are always, for my mind, that they're always guides. They're not personalities, they're guides. And I'll often get women who say, oh, I want to be the ruler. I say, well, that's okay. You might display ruler type activity. So if you look at it as behavioral indicators, ways to understand how people are going to perform in front of us, especially in a business environment, but also personally, it gives us a handle. It's like understanding visual, auditory, or kinesthetic. We're always a little bit of all of them, but we have a preference. By understanding our preferences, we can get a handle on everything else about us. So then you can start looking at personality. So, I think you and I are magicians, but we're not the same.
No.
So, it's like people saying, oh, well, I'm a Gemini, so all Geminis are the same. You go, well, I know that's not true. So the archetypes are to help us get to the table. And also in many ways have some fun about it, because I think we get very blocked sometimes. We start getting into, oh, well, all men are this, or all women are that, or men should be doing this, or women should be doing that. We're onto a hiding to nothing, because we're not going to get past the blocks. So
how can they, I'm a professional young woman, I was once, but yeah, I'm a professional young woman. I've read your book. I find your archetypes are really empowering way of thinking about relations in the workplace. I walk into the room, how can I use those archetypes to help me engage, to help me create that synergy that you were talking about?
Well, our challenge is always to understand ourselves and then become aware of other people and lean into where they're coming from. So if we lean into where somebody else is coming from, we understand there were these men in the room. So I'm a woman, I walk into the room and there's the ruler and there's the philosopher. I know that the philosopher is likely to have a more feelings-oriented conversation with me, and the ruler's not. So we take a classic situation where I think it's often what happens. The woman wants to come into the meeting with loads of ideas, and the ruler cuts her dead. Oh, sorry, that's not on the agenda today. I've got this 1, 2, 3. And he carries on doing his agenda. And she's sitting there going, oh, well, he doesn't understand me. He doesn't appreciate me. He's a XYZ kind of man. And she stopped listening. So she's not tuning in to where he's coming from. And I had a real example of this, and this was true. It was a woman who was more sovereign, but had a good awareness of herself. And she was meeting with a very expert ruler doctor who was very bullet point. And she'd been invited to the meeting by a philosopher professor. And she really didn't want to go because she knew this doctor was very diffident about women in power. So I just suggested, if you go into where he's coming from, he needs validation on his bullet points. So listen to what he's saying, have patience, keep nodding, be in there with him. And at the point where you can say, wow, that's fascinating. Could I just summarize what you said? I believe it was 1, 2, 3, and make it very succinct, and then pause. Once you get his nod, he will then start listening to you, but don't overload him with your conversation. Actually include the professor by saying, is that how you feel about this? And then you field it back into the two of them, understanding each other more, and you come out in pole position. So it sounds very prosaic, but it actually is the fundamental thing, is that we often try and change people to be what we would like them to be.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm curious, how does that apply the other way around? So you have a male client who is perhaps a ruler. How would you offer the archetype of the sovereign and the magician to help him navigate that workplace?
Well, that's a really, really good question. And this happens in our personal relationships as well. I would say to him, understand the benefit you will gain by allowing some time to listen. And this has been researched many times, is that men are very instructional. And I've had many men at the end of my session say, okay, I get that. How long do I have to listen for? Because, and I'll say, well, try 10 minutes if you can manage it, but you will gain everything by not cross-questioning the woman, but actually inviting her. So the ruler in a meeting actually saying, I think, there's some very good ideas that you have. Maybe you could give us a quick, brief rundown on what the most important one is, and we could look at the rest later. So he's kind of coming from his point of view, but I would definitely get him to understand that a woman will give more ideas and more creative contribution if she's allowed to speak by invitation. And that's where, when women say to me, oh, well, I'll just go and sort men out, I go, well, what do you mean? Because if there's not this tuning in, then the thing is not going to flow. But once we've tuned into somebody, it's amazing how different the relationship can be. So the ruler will, if he gets some really good ideas from the women at his table, he might try and own them, of course. They like to have a win. But the intention to create a relationship has to come by tuning in to the other person. And I think one of our interesting challenges is to really understand the energy flow between these characters. So,
and because women
like to chat more than men. So in a way, what I like on my chart, men talk and women chat.
Because I was just going to say, you've created a space to explore this at play through your magical conversations. Would you tell us a bit about that?
Well, this is very different to what it might appear to begin with. So when I say it's a space of no judgment, it's in a business environment and anywhere really, it's a timed space of no judgment. So, I've run these sessions officially in business, so say an hour, hour and a half. And if you have men involved, men don't like to chat on, especially the ruler. So you have to be aware of timing. But it's 3 rules. So no judgment, no anger, and no coercion. Now, what I mean by that is don't try and control the outcome. And that's what often happens in business, is that the ruler's going, okay, I need action now. Well, no, not in the time that we allocate, because it's a creative space. So if we've got 4 different characters, or we've got multiple characters, we've got multiple diversities, we need time to seed what is that beautiful difference coming in. And I talk a lot about respecting differences, but also be aware of if a character on the table is getting not necessarily bored, but they're stopping thinking because the chatter is going on too long, then we need to direct the energy so that you bring them back on board. So it's a time space, but it's essentially leaning into, tuning into the other characters, and putting the subject matter in the middle of the space. So what I mean by that is, if you were literally sitting in a circle, or even if you're in a one-on-one, recognizing the space between you is where the subject matter sits, and taking it away from being inside your ego. So that's why I say, you come with no judgment. So you come with your experience. So you might have the subject of collaboration, or let's say synergy. Everybody around the table is allowed to give their version of what, in their experience, synergy means. And the goal is that we all listen. And you might even be sitting there going, well, I don't know that I really agree with that view, but it's an interesting point of view. And we have to get to that point of being interested in difference in order to make sure it doesn't become a difficulty.
And are these free? Can anyone turn up to them?
Well, the nature of these experiences depends. If it's for a client, then no, there's a fee attached. But I do have a magical conversation wisdom circle, which is open to anybody to come along. It's once a month on every 3rd Thursday. And I'm living in America, so that's at 9 a.m. Pacific time, which
3
is
p.m.
5
BST.
Yeah, 5 p.m. British Standard Time, and we should be on the same time once the clocks change. But
that's right.
But the idea is that is a gathering of individuals from every country in the world, because I think in learning to listen to men and women from every culture, we really start learning what synergy is about. And they're guided. So I'm pulling in a subject matter. So for instance, we had one session which was about kindness. So how do we all see kindness? And is it a business value? So it's actually testing people to not bring their ego, but bring their experience. And even that is a very interesting difference. If you think about the archetypes, each archetype brings their experience of the world, not their ego. And then we can, I believe, we can start to love that in somebody else.
Wonderful. I could sit here all day with you, Pauline. It's fascinating territory to be working in, and particularly at this moment in time in history when the world is crying out for more collaboration and cooperation.
I think so, Joanne. And I think what's really interesting is that we do need to get out of our own way. That classic statement, what you think of me is none of my business. But to be true to who we are as females, not be aggressive either way, either to each other or to the other gender or to any diversity. And that's why I would come back to the end of saying respecting differences, valuing differences as well, but really respecting. We seem to devolved into a rather argumentative, polarized world at the moment. And that's why I think if we put love at the center, and love and energy and expansion of everybody, that we're all in this together, and we won't get through to the destiny of the future that we would love. But we don't necessarily need to know what that is yet, as long as love is our guide. And that means we need to respect each other.
Seems a perfect place to end. Pauline, we'll put in the information how to access your book and how to access the Magical Wisdom Circles. But I'd just like to thank you so much. What a joy to connect with you and to hear all about your work, and I think what you bring to the table at this point in time. It's been absolutely great.
Thank you so much. That's my passion and my legacy. And I'm not going to give up. However long I have in this world, I will not give up until we really have world harmony. That's my huge goal.
Wonderful. A lovely place to end. Thank you so much for being with us on Silver Tent TV. And wherever you are in the world, if the sun isn't shining in your skies, may it shine in your heart. This is Siobhan and Elsa signing out. Thank you.